Thank you so much. So good evening, everyone. My name is Kristan, and I'm Vice President of Communications for the Acadia Politics Student Association. On behalf of our association and the Jarislowsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership, I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event. Canada has a new Prime Minister, now what? So I would like to begin by first acknowledging that we're in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. So this evening, we have the opportunity to discuss one of the most pressing questions in Canadian politics today: what happens after a change in leadership at the federal level? So with Justin Trudeau stepping down and Mark Carney being elected leader of the Liberal Party and thus Prime Minister designate, and an upcoming federal election looming, there's lots to be discussed tonight. And we're so excited that you're all here to be with us. So we're grateful to be joined by an awesome group of panelists who bring a diverse experience in lots of fields: government, political strategy, community engagement, and their insights will help us to unpack the implications of this change in leadership and examine what it means for Canada's political landscape moving forward. So before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to briefly introduce our panelists. We have Churchill, the former leader of the Nova Scotia Liberal Party and longtime Yarmouth MLA. Savannah DeWolfe, former Chief of Staff to Minister Sean Fraser. Kristan Hines, former Chief of Staff to Premier Stephen McNeil. And Maura, former Liberal candidate and community engagement volunteer. So, moderating tonight's discussion is Dr. Alex Marland, professor in the Department of Politics and the Jarislowsky Chair in Trust and Political Leadership. So this is a really exciting opportunity to hear from our panelists, and then at the end we'll have an opportunity to hopefully ask some questions, and we look forward to hearing from all of you tonight. So thank you all so much for being here, and without further ado, please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming. I know you all have choices on how to spend your time, and we appreciate that you're interested in this pressing topic. I should just note I have some book prizes at the end of the evening, so don't let me go without doing some questions and passing out some free books.
Is this a competition?
No, I won't do it at this point. The way that we're going to do it in terms of format is I've got some questions, the burning questions that I have and maybe some of you have. I'm just going to turn it over and we're just going to have a conversation. And then at some point what we'll do is we'll turn it over and we'll have questions in the audience. And then again, you're going to field 3 questions at a time, and then the panelists can kind of choose which questions to deal with. And we did get one written question already, and we'll get to that one as well. So I think just to set the scene, it really wasn't very long ago. All you have to do is go back to December. And early December, Justin Trudeau was insistent that he was going to be leading the party into the next election campaign scheduled for October 2025. And things were already clearly on the ropes for him. He was in a bit of denial. Some of us think that maybe what he was trying to do was make it to 2025. It turns out that's exactly what ended up happening. December 16th, Chrystia Freeland, his Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, lets out this letter publicly on the day that she's to deliver a fall economic statement. I mean, of all days, she obviously picked that day on purpose. And basically says she's lost confidence in Justin Trudeau and she steps out of cabinet. And that just set off a roller coaster of things. Justin Trudeau says, okay, well, it's vacation time, it's Christmas, so off I go. And then people were kind of wondering what was going to happen. But the expectation was when he came back in January, everyone was sort of thinking, surely he's going to step down. And that's exactly what he announced. And so, of course, he said he would step down, which he still has not done. But he has as leader, just not as Prime Minister. And he said he would step down after the Liberal Party selected a new leader. Well, of course, we just had a leadership campaign. There's a lot of elements in there to unpack. But the bottom line is, with 4 candidates, one person who has never held elected office whatsoever ended up triumphing in a big way. There were 343 ridings that were contested. He won every single riding, including the ridings of the other contestants who have been longtime MPs. So this was an absolute landslide. And so Mark Carney is now the Prime Minister designate. This week, some of you may have picked up in the news about some of the happenings that are occurring. So he's got what appears to be a temporary Chief of Staff. That he's had some security briefings. They're very much trying to figure out, how is it that they're going to get their government going. There's a lot of things happening just to even be able to put together a cabinet. There have to be security clearances. That can take, even in a fast-paced scenario, 48 hours to 72 hours to make sure that somebody is suitable to be able to end up in cabinet. So there's a lot of conversation occurring right now on the Hill. One of the key questions, of course, is at what point does Justin Trudeau actually turn over the keys? The Prime Minister's office and most of their staff have now cleaned out their offices. Justin Trudeau was pictured this week with a photograph literally taking his chair out of the House of Commons. And for anyone wondering, he's not planning on running again as an MP. And so it's very clear that this transition is occurring, and it could be as Saturday, it could be Friday, like one of these days soon, we're going to have Prime Minister Carney. And of course, what's happening now is all the focus is on the next election. It's not even, frankly, about the Carney and the Carney government, although that's where our conversation is here today. Everybody is talking, when is there going to be an election? Of course, there's lots of speculation. It'll be the end of April, it'll be the end of May. Nobody's really talking about whether or not there could be a deal with the NDP, although I think that's something we need to talk about because it is a possibility to extend the life of this government. But the expectations are there will be a spring election, and of course what we've seen is the Liberals really come back under Carney. And a big question that I have for some of the participants here this evening is, to what extent is that a Carney vote? To what extent is that a relief that Justin Trudeau is going perception? And so that really leads us to where we are now. We could be waking up tomorrow to find out that tomorrow is the day that we have Prime Minister Carney. It could be Friday, as I said, so it's coming. So just to kind of turn it over here, I think maybe what we should do is just start out and just get a sense of your involvement, if any, in the Liberal leadership campaign. Now, sometimes it's possible that you sat this one out and you were just talking with friends and engaged, but you all are Liberals. You all have deep connections, and some of you were engaged. So maybe you can just set the scene to let us all know, to what extent were you involved? Was it as an armchair observer, or were you deep into it?
Let me start. I have had the privilege and the honor of being Mr. Trudeau's campaign chairs in Nova Scotia. And in fact, maybe 6 months ago, he called me and said, "Kristan, I would like you to do this for me." And I said, "Well, sir, I'm going to be here for you. I'm not sure exactly in what capacity, because I have a day job, and I have to be very conscious about that. I deal with everybody of all political stripes. I work with our provincial government. I work with our federal government. But I did say, I'll be here for you, because these are my values." And when he would have made that call, it would have been in pretty dark times. Yet, even in that moment, I kind of hung up the phone and I thought, his commitment to the country was absolutely unwavering. And there was no doubt that there was a disconnect that had been growing and growing, as it does over a 10-year period, without a doubt. But the commitment was there. So I sort of de facto fell into this role of, okay, well, what can I do to help? Right? This isn't my day job, but I'm here to help in any way I can. And I think one of the most valuable things that I could do, given my experiences, is help recruit candidates and help those local organizations on the ground get organized and really start to conduct robust candidate searches. So as you can imagine, the last little while has been very focused on the riding of Halifax, which is now in a by-election. And the by-election date is April the 14th. So this is the race to replace Andy Fillmore, who's now the mayor of HRM. So given the way things are going, that could get swept up in a general election campaign. So, I will continue to do my part to be a bit of a liaison with the national campaign, just helping where it makes most sense.
Okay, great.
Hi everyone, I'm Maura Ryan, and I live in the Valley. I see some familiar faces here, so much different than talking politics over wine and at the kitchen table. We're actually in a forum. I'm Cody Blois's EDA president, so Cody came out in support of Mark Carney, and of course there's anybody associated with the MP has the freedom to support who they want. Many of us chose to get behind Mark Carney and work for Mark Carney. So there was a small army of callers. We went from 300 identified Liberals in King's Hands to more than 1,900 by calling and asking if they were going to. And some people were just signing up because they feel that some of the issues that are happening in the world right now, they wanted to sign up and become engaged in supporting Mark Carney. Just never joined a political party before. So there was some of it was happening naturally. Some of it was happening as a result of our calls. So we did first round of calls kind of identifying the vote, and that was in a 2-day intense period because Carney's team wanted to know exactly out of the 1,900 people who were the Carney identified votes. We had the highest in Nova Scotia identified Carney votes, and then we hit the calls again, round 2, round 3, to verify and to ensure that we get the vote out, which is a phrase that I'm sure many of you know, but it's making sure that it's one thing to have, X amount of votes that say they're going to vote for Mark, but how many are actually going to get out. We were the 3rd highest in Canada at 94%, at King's Hands, in terms of getting that vote out and getting that support, which was important for Cody to be able to say to his future leader that I'm with you, my team was with you, we worked hard to deliver that. And I can say I've been doing this, 30-some years, probably my 7th leadership campaign, and it was the most authentic experience calling people. Normally when you call people, you're kind of a little bit shy because you feel like you're intruding in their personal space and you're calling on a political call. You might be calling someone that doesn't really want to hear from you. And this round of calls was so, people are worried. People were wanting to know exactly how their vote could count. And they were very determined to vote, going to the post office maybe 3 times to get verified the process. The party's intentions to make sure the process had an integrity piece to it so that we didn't get a lot of interference was admirable. Unfortunately, it led to a lot of frustration sometimes for the everyday voter to get through the hoops to vote. So we had to do a lot of hand-holding to talk to people, especially older people that aren't used to the joys of doing things online. So that was kind of my role here in the Valley, was kind of working with, there's a couple of callers in the audience, but working with a mighty team of local volunteers who just wanted to make sure that Mark's vote was registered and counted here for the rest of the country.
Good to know that Maura rhyme was a secret ingredient, because this morning I was listening to a national podcast where they shouted out King's Hands specifically for the work that was done there, so congratulations on that. I'm Savannah DeWolfe, really happy to be here with you all tonight. And another thing that happened on the day that Minister, now Chrystia Freeland, resigned, Sean Fraser resigned as well, or announced rather that he wouldn't seek re-election. So this was something Sean and I had been talking about for a couple of months, after a couple of months of conversations with his family. The back and forth to Ottawa is pretty draining on anybody who does it, or from Yarmouth to Halifax even, I'm sure, on young families especially. So Sean made the decision not to run for re-election, and we had the perfect plan in terms of when he would announce that and what that would all look like. But then some reporters started calling, and they had the stories. We had to kind of go a little bit sooner than what we had planned, and it so happened to be that day before the fall economic statement. So we got all of our ducks in a row for this new day and sat down, and Sean practiced his speech over and over again, and he goes to deliver it. And then the rest of us are in the office watching on the screen and get the tweet of Chrystia Freeland's letter and realize, oh shit, we could not have briefed him for that. He's going to have to answer this one on the fly. So sure enough, the first question that came to him was actually from a French reporter in French, and he gets by in French, but it's not a language that he's fluent in. So hearing that for the first time in French through translation during your own kind of speech that the finance minister and deputy minister resigned, it was a very big day, very, very surreal moment for sure. So then after all that happened, the cabinet shuffle kind of took place in the middle of all of that. So we weren't really sure if the PM was going to go, or when he was, rather. I think we were all pretty sure he needed to by that point. But he decided to shuffle cabinet. So Sean was removed from cabinet, and by virtue of that, me and my team, we all were looking for jobs all of a sudden and over the holiday period. So when the Carney campaign called and asked if I wanted to help, my answer was like, no, not right now. I really need to sleep a little bit after everything that just happened. But it is a bug, politics. It's hard to say no to when people ask you to help. So I think I did end up finding some venues for different events and things like that. But by and large, just gave them names like Ray and Jewel and others to help in Nova Scotia.
Thank you very much. So, Zach Churchill, former leader of the Provincial Liberal Party. So I remain a partisan. I was a delegate for Mark Carney. Hung out more with my family at home during the campaign than getting out knocking on doors or making phone calls. But participated in person in the federal leadership convention. And that was my first convention I'd ever been at for a federal leadership. I did go to my provincial leadership nomination. I did show up to that. And that was a really nice experience. I supported Mark Carney because I'm a centrist liberal who cares about economic and fiscal responsibility that comes with being in government, and that generates wealth for people and prosperity, and someone who also cares very much about ensuring we have a socially inclusive and progressive policy framework in our country so that people are protected and supported, and so that we can do good not just for people domestically here, but also in the global community, which we are very much a part of. But more importantly, mine and Sean's political careers actually test. The beginning of which was in student politics, and this building and Acadia played a big role in that. I was the president at St. Mary's. Sean, at the same time, was president at X, and we both came here to have fun and worked with the ASU together with the Canadian Alliance of Student Associations, as well as what's now called Students Nova Scotia, but at the time was the Alliance of Nova Scotia Student Association. So this building, this campus, has played a very important part in my career and my life, and it's so nice to be back because I have so many fond memories and non-memories, I'll be honest, of being here in this wonderful town.
Okay, great. So I can imagine that if I had a panel of people who were involved with the New Democratic Party of Canada, that the mood would be a lot less buoyant than it is if you're involved with the Liberals these days. And if they were all Conservatives, there might be a little bit of hand-wringing in what's going on. So maybe you can just help everybody in the room tap into your feelings, what it must be like to be a Liberal these days. Going from, frankly, very bleak electoral prospects not that long ago, and talk of a Conservative landslide, which may yet happen, to now, the polls that I saw today they're still within the margin of error, but actually had the Liberals slightly ahead of the Conservatives. Which is still not, that's still a fictional kind of world because we still are learning about Mark Carney, but it doesn't change, the reality is it's a fundamentally different place than we were not long ago. So can you just tell us what it's like, what you feel like as Liberals to go through this bit of a roller coaster?
I'll be really lame and say that it always feels good to be a Liberal, but what I spend my time doing right now is not explaining to my mom or in-laws who are here why the Prime Minister has done something that he's done, or trying to explain something that really didn't feel explicable sometimes, and instead you're spending your energy kind of talking about what's at stake in the election, and the ballot box question has shifted entirely, and I think it's I don't really think it is about partisan politics right now. It's about being Canadian, and that's really shifted drastically. And I think when we look at what party is best positioned to kind of keep leading that charge, all of us are kind of naturally coming to the conclusion that it is the Liberals and it is Mark Carney at the helm that's kind of taking us there. So there's energy and excitement around that whole movement, and I think there's new people coming into the party. There's folks who might normally vote PC or even Conservative who are looking at the party right now. Other progressives who are seeing what's at stake too and coming in that way. So I think there's more kind of people hopping on the bandwagon right now, but it feels good.
What was the question? Yeah, I mean, I think I probably voted for every party, to be honest. I always look at the individual whose name is on the ballot. That matters to me. I think it feels good to be a Liberal because I feel like we have a person who's just become the leader of the party that represents a steady hand. And I think people, when we're seeing what's happening south of the border, we're not seeing a steady hand, and I think we want to have a steady hand. I think that, there's a lot of work for us to get a full evaluation of Mark in terms of seeing what he's capable of, but if his past professional work is any indication, I think people are wanting that and feel some comfort from that. I heard Margaret Atwood say the opposite emotion of hope is despair, and that when you feel despair, you don't feel you have the ability to do much of anything else. And I think friends of mine that are not political are feeling a darkness, So I hope that, certainly I was up in Ottawa as well on Sunday, and I don't know if Canadians are necessarily like hyper patriots and patriotic, and but there was a sense in the room that day that it was beyond the Liberal Party, you know, the young woman came out and saying, "Oh, Canada," she put the mic to the audience, people participated. We're seeing that at the hockey games. There's a sense of level of being very proud to be from the, you know, we've always have been, but now we're saying it a little louder. And I think that's what you're feeling with some of the changes that we're seeing, is because people have been feeling a little nervous and a little bit of despair. And because Mark is now the leader, that hope is transferring to him. And it's a lot to carry, but I think he's capable of it. But, you know, I'm hopeful. And I think a lot of people that are not necessarily involved in politics are feeling a sense of hope. And I hope that gets transferred into a sense of not a hyper-partisan campaign. I mean, it's going to happen. But rather more a sense of unity and what is the bigger ballot question, which is Savannah's point, which is this is a job interview, really. Chantal, I think, Hebert said that, and it's like, who is best qualified to lead this country right now? And it's not about slogans, and it's not about being slick, and it's not about hype. It's about what can you bring to bring a steady hand to the wheel, so that our country remains intact, and that people feel okay about the decisions that you're going to make. And I think that's what it feels for me to be a Liberal right now.
Okay, so in a moment, I'll turn the questions over more about what comes next. But before we get there, I'm going to ask, I've got a preamble to explain about Mark Carney, but just to give you a heads up, I'm going to ask you a question for something about Mark Carney that none of us know, or something about his organization, so something interesting, some anecdote or something like that, so just a heads up. So for a lot of us, we're still trying to figure out who Mark Carney is. And so what we do know is that he actually has a pretty stellar resume. Now, before I summarize Mark Carney's resume for you, so you're all familiar, he does actually have some weaknesses, and he's human, right? Like, there is no such thing as a unicorn who doesn't have any flaws whatsoever. And so, you know, I'll just openly, I think it's useful for us to be aware, like, most of us in this room are Anglophones. I think if we were in a room full of Francophones, a number of us would probably be a little concerned about the next Prime Minister's command of the French language. There are certainly conservatives that are very concerned about the fact that Mark Carney fudged, if not outright lied, about when he was chair of Brookfield Asset Management and some decisions that were being made about reallocating assets down to the United States. There are some other concerns about, you know, the delivery the other day of his acceptance speech was not as animated as Jean Chrétien, who is over 90 years old. Right? So this is somebody who has never held elected office at all. These are all very significant weaknesses when you are dealing with what's going on down in the States, as well as you're about to go into an election campaign against a very fierce competitor in Pierre Poilievre. So there's a number of challenges that are there, and on top of that, he's taking over a political party that has been in government for 9.5 years, and there's a time for change movement that in some ways he is satisfying, but in other ways maybe there's still people who want change. The question is, does he provide stability? Now, for those of you who are saying, oh my God, stop dumping all over Mark Carney, I'm going to now tell you about his resume, which is quite impressive other than those flaws. He was born in the Northwest Territories. His parents were teachers. At the age of 6, he left the Northwest Territories. His family moved down to Edmonton, Alberta. He went to school there. He had a paper route. He delivered the Edmonton Journal. His father in 1980 ran as a Liberal candidate, placed second to the PCs over there. When he's a valedictorian of his high school, he gets a partial scholarship to go to Harvard University. He goes there to study English literature, and he's also interested in math. He goes to an economics lecture, becomes very inspired, and then ends up saying, well, I'm going to study economics. And so his undergraduate degree, which he did quite well in from Harvard, was in economics. He then goes on to Oxford, where he gets a master's, and 2 years after that, he gets a PhD in economics. He meets his eventual wife while he's a student. She's also an economist, and she is quite successful in her own right. She's British. She does a number of things involving trying to advise organizations, particularly with concern around climate change in Africa. So he leaves there. He ends up working for Goldman Sachs, which is an international investment company. He ends up working in Toronto, Tokyo, and a few other locations. He ends up coming back to Ottawa, and he makes a decision And that decision is to give up all sorts of financial wealth that you can obtain as essentially somebody who's an investment advisor. And he decides that he wants to do something for public service. Now, by this time, he's working enough time that I assume he'd accumulated enough assets to make that decision. He ends up working in the Bank of Canada, and when he's there, of course, that's the non-governmental organization that sets monetary policy. He ends up leaving right around 2004. He works in the government as an assistant deputy minister of finance, governor of Canada. And then he gets propelled forward. His career just takes off because he jumps over some other people and suddenly becomes governor of the Bank of Canada. And then on top of that, not long after he becomes governor, we end up having the financial crisis, the housing crisis that came out of the United States, coincidentally the US, affected our economy. And so he was really credited with being providing a stable hand. And people say, well, he doesn't deserve credit, others say he does, but the bottom line is a lot of people thought he was really smart and astute and making good decisions. So much so that he gets poached for the exact same job to go over and do the same job and to be governor of the Bank of England, the first non-Brit to do that. While he's in Britain, he gets British citizenship. Incidentally, he also has Irish citizenship because one set of his grandparents are from Ireland. In the 1980s, he got Irish citizenship. He has said recently he's in the process of revoking those citizenships because he doesn't believe that a Canadian Prime Minister should have all these other citizenships. So he's over there, and then he starts becoming a little more of a public figure because when Brexit is occurring, he goes out and publicly warns, don't do this, don't go with Brexit. When the Scottish referendum is occurring, he says, don't support Scotland separating, we're better united. And so a lot of politicians are sort of noticing this thing. This is not normal for a key public servant to do these things. So after this, he then ends up leaving right at 2020, right when the COVID pandemic happens, comes back to Ottawa, and he ends up taking on a number of kind of distinguished positions. And by the way, along the way, he's accumulating the Order of Canada. He got, from what I've been able to count, at least 4 honorary degrees, including one, incidentally, from Israel, which I think is actually telling. It tells you something about him. And what ends up happening is he ends up being appointed for a climate change advisor with a group of banks through the United Nations. He ends up on a whole bunch of boards. And then in the meantime, he starts advising Justin Trudeau about monetary policy and what to do in the crisis that is the pandemic. And gradually, he's playing footsie with the Liberals, and Justin Trudeau starts trotting him out, and then he's not ready for it, and et cetera, et cetera. And he played a long game. If you think about it, for somebody who's been talked about as a future prime minister by so many people for so long, how many times have any of us, until recently, actually even seen an interview with him? We hardly know anything about him. And yet somehow he's suddenly skyrocketed, and he's really at the perfect time. It's at the exact time where people want a measure of calm and credibility with international finance, and he's in some ways perceived to be a bit of an antidote to the hurricane that's coming out of the United States. So that gives you, I'm sorry for talking so long, but it was just so that we all have some information about somebody who's able to become Prime Minister of our country. So what can you add to that we don't already know? Savannah?
Well, I mean, what I learned at the convention, and I was pretty excited about actually, is that he's shorter than me. Like I've served with I had to serve with Stephen McNeil, 6'7", been friends with Sean Fraser for a long time, 6'8", Ian Rankin, 6'3". It can be a bit intimidating. People like tall people in politics. So it was quite refreshing to actually hover over him a little bit at Darcy McGee's in Ottawa. I was really quite pleased about that. I think in terms of what personally draws me to him and why he has my support and confidence in this moment, and again, he is untested. This is a really unique, challenging circumstance for him and anybody else who has been in that situation, coming in at the end of a long government term as a new leader with an election that is most likely imminent. Everybody else has failed, at least in my lifetime. John Turner, Kim Campbell, Us provincially, Ian went through the same thing after Stephen. So he is in a really challenging situation. And I mean, what draws me to him, not just as a partisan, but as you know, a citizen of the country, is I do think philosophy, policy, and values really do matter in politics. And the ones that he espouses, being in the center, being practical, having a good sense of how to deal with a tariff trade war, I think is really important.
Yeah, maybe the most surprising thing that I could share based on, you mentioning him playing footsie with the Liberals, so to speak, for a sustained period of time, is that he really didn't know if he was going to run or not. And I think it's really impossible to make that decision when you don't know when you might be running or not. So I think by the time the Prime Minister resigned, it was time. It was time to get a campaign team together. If the campaign team wasn't already together and just waiting for this whole thing to kind of happen. So that was probably the thing that it surprised me personally. I'm sure all of you too, if you think this person is, plotting and planning this big long journey into the Prime Minister's office, that they've got that whole thing kind of mapped out. But I do really think it was the sincere opportunity that arose for him to make a difference in a way that maybe only Mark Carney could right now. So that was probably the most surprising thing for me, is that he wasn't sitting kind of waiting, watching, and just counting time. It was, now's the moment, let's seize it, and everything kind of grew around him when he made that decision.
Couple things that surprised me. I think that you talked about playing footsies with Trudeau, but you neglected to comment on the fact that he worked with Harper and Jim Flaherty. And when Pierre Poilievre's wife had a very strong tweet that went out about some of his lack of abilities, it was Jim Flaherty's chief of staff who stood by him and said, he did good work for us, and how dare you try to suggest that it was less than what it was, because I was in the rooms when he worked with Jim and when he worked with Stephen Harper, and he was a true public servant. So that's one thing that might be surprising for some. The second thing, I'll tell you, when I went into Halifax, there was a reception to meet Mark, and I was not decided who I was supporting, because I was a little concerned about the Iggy 2.0 factor, and I wanted to meet him for myself and listen to him for myself before I made a decision. And he spoke, and of course he was intelligent, and you would expect that based on his pedigree and the work that he's done. So he didn't surprise me there. But what did surprise me, and what I didn't know about him, was how genuine and authentic he was. There was 100 people in that room. He never rushed away from anybody. They were in a lineup to talk to him, ask him questions. He was present, he was patient, and he was genuine. And then I went with some people from Gaspereau the next day. We drove down to the Enfield Legion. Cody organized a reception in a very last minute, and there was about 250 people that came out. And again, he stood at the front of the room. There was a long line of people that wanted to speak to him, and he stood there, much probably to the people in Trudeau's dismay, because there was another event that he was supposed to get to, and he waited until every person got through the lineup. And yes, he's running for leadership, and of course he has to do that, but I think it was the fact that he was a very genuine human to me that was encouraging for me. So you need that retail side of politics, but I also, like when I said earlier that I voted for every party and every person on the ballot, the human component and who you are and your values and how you treat other people, that can't be lost now more than ever, and I'd like to see that. I saw that reflected in Mark when I met him those 2 times.
Okay, so now I'm going to turn us a little bit more to what's ahead. Savannah, I'm going to start with you just because you have the most recent experience working in the Trudeau government. So I think a lot of you would know, but maybe some people don't. A refresher is helpful. So March 2026 is Parliament has to come back. What happens if we get to that point of mind you? What happens then is it starts out with a speech from the throne, and so the speech from the throne outlines what the government is planning on doing. This is the typical approach after you've had Parliament prorogued. So it would outline what a Carney government would be doing, and that in itself becomes a test of confidence. If they can't get a vote on that to pass through the House, then what happens is the Prime Minister Carney, would have to go to the Governor-General and say, I don't have the confidence of the House, and I think there should be an election. But even before that, there's also something called a reply to the speech on the throne. That's actually an opportunity for the Conservatives and for the NDP to start putting forward essentially their own perceptions, and there's votes on that. And so, in other words, right away they will be thrust into a situation where they have to get those particular things through the House in order to survive as a government. Otherwise, there has to be an election. So this is why a lot of people are saying, well, it just as well makes sense to go to the Governor General before that, and then you control the narrative, you control the frame, you don't allow all this sort of speculation. Instead, you're the one who is saying, we have a clear choice here, and we need to do this. So this is why a lot of people are thinking this will be the approach. But before we get to that point, what has to happen is Mark Carney right now is making decisions, if he hasn't already, about who's going to be in his cabinet. There were reports, you never know for sure until you find out the results, but there's reports that he's going to make cabinets smaller. There are some reports that he is interested in bringing in people maybe who don't even have a seat in Parliament. We don't know if that's the case. We have to remember he doesn't have a seat in Parliament himself, which is another element to all of this. And so in forming a cabinet, he's having to consider a lot of the normal things, which is regional balance. He's trying to, obviously for the Liberals, gender parity really matters, and there's other things. But also he's got to somehow put a new stamp on this government. If he's really going to represent change, how do you do it when it's pretty much all the same MPs who are there? And you don't really have enough time to switch them all out because they have to learn their files. Does it really make sense to take Melanie Joly, who is doing an outstanding job as far as I can tell, and almost makes me wish she had run for leader? Does it make sense to pull her out? And no, it doesn't. It makes sense to keep her there. It makes sense to keep Dominic LeBlanc in finance, etc., etc. So there will be some turnover. Maybe we can all just talk about what is happening right now in Ottawa that that maybe a lot of us don't know, and some insights that you can help us understand what's happening.
Well, the short answer, like you said at the outset, is that we have someone unelected who's about to become the Prime Minister. So it's kind of open season in that there are a lot of possibilities that aren't normally in play when these kinds of things are going on. What's most likely to happen is of course different than what could. But what's most likely to happen, I think, by the accounts that most of us are likely hearing, is that they will choose a cabinet this week, and they will probably not call the House back. Like you said, having your leader not have a seat in that chamber wouldn't leave the party in a good position. So we will most likely head into an election shortly after a cabinet is put together. And with that cabinet, I think there's a lot of talk, and sometimes you said you don't know if the reports are true or not until you kind of see what happens. Sometimes those things are kind of floated like trial balloons to see what people's response are to those things, and it becomes kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy with what can and can't happen. But there's been some talk of other unelected members being brought into that cabinet. I think we could look at NAFTA or CUSMA and kind of who was around those tables, who's on kind of the economic advisory tables, and sort of see where they might draw talent from. I wouldn't be surprised if it's across party lines, maybe even for current elected members, but definitely for more senior figures that are probably kind of household names for many of us that they might try to draw from to help meet the moment with what's going on with President Trump. So I would think that this week we'll have a new cabinet, that it will be smaller, that it will be more diverse in terms of it won't necessarily just be members of Parliament who will form that cabinet. And then I expect that we do want a chance to really solidify that ballot box question. We really want it to be who is best placed to deal with Trump. And so whether that is, a speech almost delivered to Donald Trump but that the rest of us are privy to, or some kind of engagement that allows them to kind of set the tone to show that they are the competent team that can handle this. And then I think you want to keep the momentum up. Like, you just crushed the leadership. You don't wait. I think we just saw that in the States too. With Ms. Harris, you don't want to wait when you have that momentum. I'm sure she wishes that election would have been a lot closer to her getting the leadership. So I think we'll kind of keep going from there.
So what's happening in Ottawa, the behind the scenes, it's a very small group of people that are involved in a transition, like 5 people. It could be, Savannah probably knows this better than I, but a small group of people that are thinking about these things. When do we want to have him sworn in? What does the cabinet look like? When do we pull the plug? What is our positioning? So what's happened in the Prime Minister's office, the Prime Minister's still effectively there until Mr. Carney's sworn in. There's been some staffing changes already. We've seen it at Chief of Staff. Whether he's a permanent Chief of Staff, we don't know. It certainly depends on the outcome of the election. There's been some hiring taken taking place. And for those of us that have worked on the Hill and worked in politics, it is a period of sort of stress and uncertainty. There's a lot of individuals that go to Ottawa, that are from Ottawa, that really commit to supporting members of parliament and ministers. So it is a period of transition and uncertainty, but also, I think, one of excitement. So lots of things taking place up in Ottawa. I can't imagine that we get to the end of next week without a call. I could be wrong. It just feels like it's very, very imminent. So.
Okay, I have one last question. You don't all have to answer this, just because now we're pressing up against time, and I want to be able to turn it over so that there's some audience questions. So only answer if you feel a need to. I think we would be remiss not to, if we're in a university, we have to explore different options. One of the things that happens in politics is sometimes when we all know something to be true, that's exactly what doesn't happen. So if we're all absolutely convinced there's going to be an election call, this sort of thing, I think it's actually upon us to try to make sure, okay, well, have we also thought about alternatives, and so that we're kind of intellectually prepared for that possibility. And so this leads me to the NDP. Among a number of things that could happen is the Carney government could decide, well, what we want to do is present a big financial package to support workers who are going to be in trouble once these tariffs presumably hit at the beginning of April, who are going to be out on the picket lines or whatever it is, out on employment insurance that takes a while to come through, while we are all out campaigning. So we need to get measures through now, and we need Parliament to do that. And the NDP will be on side with this. So what you could potentially do is you could recall Parliament, you could present it as saying, listen, we need a big financial package to support workers, and what you try to do is box in the Conservatives to going against that, and then there's your campaign issue. You say these people are not here to help the public, they are against, whatever, their side with Trump, etc., etc. So that's one way to potentially proceed and frame things. So you can use the legislature as a tool to frame the election, even if you know you might end up losing a vote or whatever the case may be. So I'm simply raising that as one of the possibilities out there, rather than everybody walking out today convinced there would definitely be an election call next week. I'm not saying I know what will happen, I'm just saying it's our job to kind of think about all of it. So I'm just looking for a response if anybody has a firm thought on what I've just said.
Well, first, I don't know if I'd call it a firm thought, but there are options right now. Currently, the Prime Minister, soon-to-be Prime Minister Carney, is in the driver's seat. He's in the driver's seat until he gets into the House of Commons. And then, in our democracy, thankfully, the representatives have the power in there, and he does not have control or influence or whip that can drive the majority of the votes in there. So he does lose his ability to be in the driver's seat there. So that probably weighs in, I think, to his and his team's strategic decision making on what they're going to do. Whether they want to stay in the driver's seat, define the terms of the election as they see it and the ballot question, which I think is clear to a lot of people and should be right now, or whether they want to go face a House that said that the House wants to take them down. That said, there are alternatives. A friend of mine who lives in Barrington sent me a text last night, coincidentally, saying, if you have any say over Mark Carney, you should tell him to call a multi-partisan national unity government and bring, because of this threat that we're facing, and bring members of the other parties in, much like my uncle Winston Churchill would have done during World War II, and much like other governments do when there is a threat to the nation. That's a very interesting idea. I think under the current circumstances, that's probably very challenging. We've got a hyper-partisan opposition. Until recently, I think under Carney, the Liberals have been hyper-partisan as well. But there are options for him to consider, and I certainly think that's one worthy of thinking about. But then again, he's the one in charge. He's the one in the driver's seat, and he risks losing his ability to control the steering wheel if he does face the House.
Great. So now we're going to take some questions from the audience. We'll take 3 questions and then we'll hand it off to our panelists. So just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question.
Hi everybody, thank you for coming out tonight. Kristan, I heard that you mentioned the Halifax by-election. I found that really interesting because I was looking at the slate of candidates for each party today, and I came to the realization that the Liberals have far less candidates selected in local ridings than the Conservatives, and I know that some Conservative candidates have been canvassing for like a year now. So my question would be, to what extent is that a problem, and where are we in that process?
Thank you. We'll take 2 more questions.
So I wanted to ask a question pertaining to the carbon tax. So the Conservative Party has really been pushing axe the tax, and Mark Carney has positioned himself against the consumer portion of the carbon tax. What can we expect to see with the Liberal government incoming with Mark Carney on the position of the carbon tax?
Thank you. And we'll do 1 more. We'll do in the back and then we'll get to you on the next one. Thank you.
What are you going to do about Premier Tim Houston's proposed amendments to Bill 6 fracking in Nova Scotia?
Thank you for those questions.
Okay, thanks. So we had 3 different questions, and also we also have a written one to deal with as well afterwards. Why don't we just start over here? And
Like an easy question.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's easy. I think, and I don't know this for certain, I think the Liberals may have nominated officially something like 168 candidates. So certainly there's more to come. You know, we were having this conversation today. When the writ is dropped, when it's game time, there is still a period of time during which candidates can be nominated. There's always a deadline. But certainly I think the party has tried to prioritize getting incumbents nominated again, looking at those ridings where they think they have a really good shot of winning. You know, it is strategic, but you know, just as we've talked about, the water on the beans has changed significantly. The problem of candidate recruitment is really, I'm finding, no longer much of a problem. There's a lot of people stepping forward. Halifax is a perfect example of, it looked entirely different, that lineup, than it would have a few weeks prior. So I also know that the federal Liberal Party, the national campaign, that internal mechanism, they're like hamsters on a wheel. They are pushing things through very, very quickly. And I think all parties always commit to run, wherever possible, to run whenever possible, to run a full slate. So I think the party will certainly be in good shape, but without a doubt we'll have to move very, very quickly.
Just to maybe pick up on the second half of your question, because you had sort of said what kind of disadvantage might that be for somebody who, you know, like the Conservatives, like you mentioned, could be out canvassing. And I would just say to Kristan's point about the mood and how different everything is, we were door knocking and phone calling a little bit in the Halifax by-election already, and there are Mark Boudreau's signs at a couple of different locations. And you know, when Shannon won the nomination in Halifax for the Liberals, overnight she had to, you know, figure out where she was going to get her signs printed, get the templates all done, do all of that, get the signs there, get somebody to, you know, build the stakes and go get them in, and of course find people whose lawns you can pop them on. So there's a lot of work to do there, but at the same time, knocking on the door without any signs in the background, the way you're received right now as a Liberal candidate is a lot different than you were a couple of months ago. And in Halifax, I really don't think the Conservatives were ever really going to be competitive. It was between the NDP and Liberals. So the signs are there for Mark Boudreau, but I don't think that that's really going to change much, and I don't feel like the Liberal candidate is at a disadvantage. I think, if anything, sometimes you don't want these things to go on for too long because volunteers get burnt out, you kind of lose momentum and energy. So they're probably in a sweet spot that's not like a couple of weeks like we might be looking at in some of these instances, but I don't think you need months or years to do it effectively either.
On the the taxation question, he was very clear in his acceptance speech and in the leadership race that many of the tax reforms that had been brought in over the last number of years by the Trudeau government will either be reversed or adjusted. The rationale for that is because we are facing some pretty serious economic threats and challenges that will affect investment, income for small businesses, and the economy overall. And you know, Mr. Carney is one of those centrist liberals like Kristan and Marland were, where he does care about that and has an idea on the levers that governments have to provide support. And taxation is the number one. I agree with those. So you will see some adjustments there. On the fracking question, I mean, I served in the legislature as the leader of the opposition. I don't anymore, so there's, you know, I have limited ability to impact that decision. But and the opposition in Nova Scotia has been severely reduced. So there is a supermajority PC government here in Nova Scotia, and they've got, I think, 43 seats. I think the NDP have 9 or 10, and there's 2 left of the Liberals. So the opposition ability to impact decision making has been severely reduced. That said, this is a government and a premier that is very reactive to public pressure, to negative media headlines, and so if there are issues, whether it's, you know, fracking or something else that people do care about, you know, with this government, I do think if there develops a political challenge, either locally or more broadly, you tend to see a response to that, and we've seen that with a number of, you know, reversals in policy decisions or announcements. So right now, I mean, there's more power in, I think, the people and the media than in the current opposition landscape.
And so just before I pass it over, there was a written one, and so I just wanted, the question that was written was about Israel and Palestine, which of course is a very, you know, a very challenging topic. And I just want to say respectfully thank you to the person who wrote these very thoughtful questions. And so I just want to know if the way that I want to be able to handle this is, if anybody here is able to tell us what is Mark Carney's position on you know, Israel-Hamas, Israel-Palestine, but then also on another major international issue about Ukraine and Russia. So does anybody know what his stated positions are on these topics?
I don't know that he's is he?
I don't think he has.
I don't know that he has defined his policy on this. I think the Liberal position has tended to try to balance the humanitarian concern of Gaza and currently the devastation and catastrophic loss of life there, with the fact that Israel remains a you know, key geopolitical ally. And it's a very uncomfortable position to be in, particularly under these circumstances. As leader of the provincial party, I certainly stood up and supported a ceasefire and certainly, you know, a de-escalation of the conflict, because there has been you know, a very clear disproportionate response to the actions by Hamas that began this part of the conflict, and the outcomes have been you know, catastrophic and terrible. And on top of that, now you have, you know, Prime Minister Trump that just says, I'm just going to take the land, and the U.S. is going to have it, along with Greenland and Canada and everything else. So the situation is certainly very precarious there. I think the UN has defined some very kind of thoughtful policies and positions on this that can help. But the UN's also been doing that for a long time, and we still have this terrible conflict that's been ongoing, and not only has obviously impacted you know, Palestinians in a terrible way, Israelis as well, but it's impacted you know, the community here in Halifax, where for years you saw the Jewish community, the Muslim community, the Christian community, the secular community, kind of all coming together, being at each other's events, and those tensions have been escalating too. So it is having a domestic impact here. So that is going to have to be something that he and his government have some very clear policies on, I believe, as well as, of course, the situation in Ukraine, which is another catastrophe. And I'm particularly scared and disheartened by the American reversal in terms of supporting a democratic country against a dictatorial aggressor. Because I think that's telling us where the president's sympathies lie, and again another reason why I'm very fearful about what potentially could happen here.
I mean, I don't have a specific answer for what his position are on those two issues, but I think that there was some comments today that how this, and we're all kind of political people that are interested in politics and from a armchair view, and I think that they're saying that when we watch this campaign unfold, when it does unfold, that the typical smaller issues, and I'm not suggesting that the two you raised are small because they're not, but what's happening in some of the, with the United States and some of these other broader issues, that the small, like the fracking, to your point, it's a good question, but will they get the proper time and attention that they're going to deserve because of all the challenges that are happening in the world? And so that it's going to be very hard for people that have passions or interest in specific issues, because the overarching theme is going to be about some of the more complex issues in the world that are taking place. And the regional issues that we usually see in a national campaign are going to take a second place. And it's going to be like one overarching theme, which is who is standing up for Canada. And that is, so as the campaign goes on, I'll be interested in watching the coverage of that. What kind of attention do special interest groups or people that have strong opinions on the issues that are happening around the world or in their country or in their community, will they be able to elevate those issues and get the attention that they want? Because it seems to be so focused on some of these larger issues, and how do you grab the media's attention? How do you grab it when everybody is so focused on this one overarching issue?
So I think we're getting close for time here. Do we want to do 3 more questions from the audience?
I find it fascinating that you ask 3 because my memory is about 5 seconds long, so I can usually remember the first one, and then I'm like, oh my God, what was the second one? And anyway, I'm just teasing.
Just 1 or 2 more questions. We'll go to the center here.
Thank you for coming out tonight. There was speculation earlier about what would this room be like if we were within the NDP, if the conversation was NDP focused. What about Quebec? You speak of existential threat. I hear a lot from Doug Ford recently. I don't know what's going on with Quebec. I have very little idea how that shapes this election, but invariably it does.
And maybe we'll do 1 final question.
Oh, there's only 2 left. We can probably do both.
Okay, we'll take 2 more then.
Thank you all for all your conversations tonight. I've really enjoyed it. My question is kind of, as Liberals, what would you say to people who had been looking for change and who had been thinking about voting for either the NDP or the Conservatives? What would you say to them to convince them that Mark Carney will bring the change they want after 9 years of Liberal government?
Thank you for coming out tonight. In the event of an election, how would the transition to a caretaker government affect the government's ability to react to anything that President Trump imposes on Canada?
Anyway, you read my bio, I'm a comms person. So I'm not going to get too deep into some of those other answers. Your question about Quebec is interesting because we are living in a time of, and when you look at the premiers, the personality of the premier and the personality of the office, Ford has been very good, in my opinion, of kind of using this issue to ensure that he has a front row seat in a lot of media interviews. I'm not sure what's happening in Quebec because his counterpart there has been quieter, I would suggest to you, I'm guessing. Maybe some of the conversations that we had at the front of the evening about will there be other people coming in that aren't elected, coming into the cabinet, will they be from the province of Quebec would be an interesting observation if that's something they're talking about in Ottawa this week. So some of that is personality driven and their ability to kind of gain some of that focus and attention for themselves. With respect to your question about how do we convince you, I'm always reluctant to convince you. You know, when I was a candidate, I tried to find out what was important to the person and then reflected my values back and then let them make their own decision. I still believe that's a very important process. You have to do your own homework. You have to, you know, be invested and come to things like you're doing tonight. When the election starts, whatever community that you're voting in, you go to the forums, you ask the questions, you listen, because those are all wonderful opportunities to hear what people really stand for. How do they handle the pressure of those questions? How do they show themselves on the doorstep versus how do they show themselves in a forum? And that's, you know, it's such a personal decision, and I think it's just more about doing your homework and asking the questions and having conversations with people, like-minded people, or actually not like-minded people, people that maybe share a different value system or a different point of view from a partisan point of view, so you can kind of get a sense of what really matters to your, what's going to reduce your interest points to make you, before you mark your X. And there was a third one, but I'm going to leave that to the group.
Well, what's happening in Quebec is very interesting, and it may just be because we're all Anglophones and aren't tuned into the French media that we're not totally aware of what the Premier of Quebec or the government of Quebec are saying or doing. So I might have a blind spot on that, as many of us might in the room. But certainly I wanted my phone because I think the polls may be an interesting indication of what's happening in Quebec. So you are seeing what seems to be a slipping of the Bloc Quebec, of support for the Bloc Québécois, of course the separatist party in Quebec, and you are seeing an increase once again in support for the Liberal Party, and that may be an indication that the voters of Quebec and the citizens of Quebec are as concerned or more concerned about the threat to Canada and to their language rights and the society that they have carved out, the unique society they've carved out in that country. In terms of the changes I think people will see between Carney and Trudeau, you know, Justin Trudeau is a kind of a values-based leader. He's identifies as a social activist, and certainly very much governed as an activist prime minister, and did what many people either like or criticize as being virtue signal. And I think his popularity very much was kind of linked to public sentiment that was aligned with those values coming out of the Harper years. But then we started to hit some very challenging economic waters, and people's pocketbooks and bank accounts are being affected, our purchasing power is being affected. Young voters who I think very much identify with a lot of these social progressive values of the NDP and Justin Trudeau started to also worry about other things, like whether they'd be able to afford a home, or if they were going to be, living with their parents for an indeterminate amount of time. So it's harder to be, I think, a values-based leader in a moment where there is economic challenge and financial struggle and a bit of turmoil. And what I think we will all see from Carney, as he's projected to date, is that he's very much more of a, I think, policy, fiscally driven, economic driven kind of leader with trade experience, with banking experience, with very clear thoughts on how taxation impacts our economy and people's pocketbooks. So I think you will certainly see the kind of patriotic values and the centrist values of longstanding centrist values of the Liberal Party being demonstrated and espoused through Carney. you will see less probably of the virtue signaling or immediate focus on some of the social progressive policies that do matter to a lot of people, and that also trigger negative reactions amongst another segment of the population. And I think you'll see very kind of clearly defined and different economic policies, particularly around how we tax and how we treat business and those sorts of things. Caretaker government, so even in a writ period, cabinet ministers are still ministers, and they still have authority. It's more challenging during a writ period, obviously, when everyone's out campaigning, but we still will have a cabinet. The prime minister will still be the prime minister. The ministers will still be the ministers, but there won't be any kind of immediate decision-making unless it needs to be in response to something. So if Trump does trigger another tariff threat or some sort of action, I mean, that could bring the cabinet together, and they would have to, and would have the ability and authority to make decisions if required.
I'll be quick and just add on to the Quebec piece a little bit there, because you're entirely right. It is very important, and as Liberals, you can't form government without Quebec. We don't get enough seats in Western Canada to be able to do that. So you absolutely need a Quebec strategy if you count on winning an election as Liberal. And I think maybe one of the things that we'll see later this week even is some hopefully strong cabinet picks from Quebec that will join. I know we've probably seen reports about Jean Charest. I don't know if that one will happen or not, but I don't doubt that we will have other very strong Quebecers that end up joining the cabinet, or at least senior tables around government for that reason. And to Zach's other point about just how offensive a francophone would probably find comments around being the 51st state, they would, probably more than any of us, appreciate the implications of having your language rights eroded that quickly overnight. So I think they would find that repulsive, and probably are also in this kind of rally around the flag moment that the rest of the country is in. But Quebec has also taken part in all the formal delegations that have sent reps down to kind of have negotiations with other counterparts. So I think they are doing their part, just, perhaps not as loudly, vocally, or for just straight up partisan gain like Ford might be.
And look, thank you, Savannah. I think those were great comments about Quebec. I would agree. In terms of, the pitch from Mark Carney, I'm with Maura. Really do your homework. There's great choices out there. The Political Science Society, which I probably got the name wrong, but there's this amazing group of really engaged folks who, by all accounts, get together regularly, watch leaderships, have discussions. We need to see more and more of that. I'm so glad there's robust conversations and across, nonpartisan, objective conversations taking place here on this campus. Boy, we need to increase voter turnout. We need to get people. How do you, it's about how do you rebuild trust? That is a great big giant question we could spend hours talking about, but I really do hope that people will be engaged. We're hearing and feeling that they are more engaged. That is critical for a well-functioning democracy. We can't have, the few determining the will of all. So thank you. Thank you for this. These conversations are really important. I think do your homework. And for me, I can, I will disclose that I too have voted for Mark Carney in the leadership. For me, he felt like the right person for the time. As you'll see in my bio, the pleasure of working with Zach and former Premier Stephen McNeil, who never, in a million years, coming out of Bridgetown, Annapolis County, thought that he'd be the Premier of Nova Scotia. It was circumstances that really brought him, and he'll say, it was never my plan, but I felt really compelled to stand up. I can remember him trying to recruit other people to run for the Liberal leadership at the time. So he was sort of a reluctant candidate. And while, everyone will have their opinions on Mr. McNeil's leadership, it's something I was incredibly proud to be a part of. And he, in my opinion, he was the right person for the right time. So that's sort of how I regard Mr. Carney.
I just wanted to close, I think we're closing, but I wanted to thank the students that we had dinner with before we came. It was wonderful. Thank your classmates, and I know there's a lot of work that goes to this in terms of your regular classwork. This was the stuff that I actually love more than my classwork, so I hear you. And I also I'd be remiss if there's anybody that wants to see what it's like to be involved in a campaign. If in fact there is a campaign called, election called, look me up on Facebook. I'm campaign manager for Corby Blois, and we're going to be looking for some volunteers, so would welcome anybody to have a chance to have some conversations, and if it's not a right fit, it's not a right fit. But democracy is made up of people who come forward and contribute to whatever party they feel aligned to. And I wanted to thank everyone for giving us the opportunity to be heard tonight. Thank you.
Okay, don't go yet because I have some book giveaways. You know, the people who are here today came here of their own time. They realized it was an important topic, and it was you know, something that they wanted to talk with you about. And some of them had to drive quite a distance and now have to drive again to get home. So please join with me in thanking them for coming to join us.